where we're kind of turning down some opportunities. It's really making sure that we grow strategically. So growing into markets where we can properly support things. I can tell you since running the firm, I've actually turned down more business than we've taken on.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Multifamily Mind. My name is Steve Wunch, and I will be your host for today's conversation. Excited to have Ian Bingham joining us today. For those of you that don't know him, Ian has over 25 years of industry experience in market rate, affordable student housing, and single-family rentals. So he's done just about everything there is to do out there. Prior to joining Buckingham, which is his current company, Ian spent several years at RPM Living, CF Real Estate Services as the Senior Vice President of Business Development. Before that, he was an executive with Village Green Holding, where he focused on both business development and site operations for 17 years. In his role, he's responsible for the growth and relationship management of private wealth and institutional clients for Buckingham's third-party management services. Additionally, he focuses on merger acquisition activity in the multifamily and single-family management space, and he specializes in assisting clients in achieving their investment goals and has a vast understanding of primary and secondary markets throughout North America. So let's welcome him to the show. Ian, I don't know if you can hear it, but the applause is deafening. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's a heck of an intro.
Sounds like a pretty cool guy.
I listen to you read it back, I go, wow, that maybe sounds more impressive than it is, but I appreciate it.
Hey, you'd hire yourself, right?
Yeah, no, with that intro, I'm going to use you as my lead-in if I'm ever in the market again.
I'm happy to help anytime I can. So I love the fact that you've kind of got this investment background and sort of have your finger on the pulse of maybe where the market currently sits. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the climate of development and purchasing, because, we've been through a couple of years where it's been quite the rodeo with supply chain issues, with costs to develop skyrocketing. Time to get things across the finish line takes a lot longer than it does now. So in that regard, Ian, what's currently some of the things that are on your mind?
Yeah, and I think we segment that into two buckets, right? So you talk about the purchase environment first. We've been in this industry long enough. You see the cycles, and they truly are exactly that. Some are faster, some are longer. This last cycle, everyone said was coming to an end for about 6 straight years. I heard all the analogies. We're in the 10th inning. We're in the 12th inning, right? It just kept going. And we certainly, I think right at the end there, burnt the candle brightest. Rents just escalated to all-time highs. But let's bear in mind, so did things like property insurance and taxes and operating expense. So there was a concurrent run-up. I don't think anyone was crying poor as rents escalated, but at the same time, operating expenses took a run too. And so, now we hit today and we go, well, how do we buy deals? And I think everyone immediately points to, well, the interest rate environment, has really hampered our ability to buy deals. And there's some truth to that, right? Because we were all operating under, I think all-time low cap rates and interest rates. And now we're kind of a bit of back to the future in that we've bought at 6 to 7 to 8% interest before. This isn't something that's untenable or impossible. What has come into play now is that bid-ask spread to where, what is the property really worth? And just because you bought it at a value in 2020, is that the value today? And in many cases, probably not.
Kind of mirrors with the mortgage situation kind of that people are finding themselves in too, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. I think, there's always going to be parity in asset class, right? So whether we're talking about office or retail, and multifamily has been the belle of the ball for at least the last decade, and it's been nice, right? When we look at the product classes, you go, boy, I'm glad I'm in multifamily. And I'm still really glad I'm in multifamily when I compare us to the other asset classes, by the way. But we're finding new ways to buy as an industry and as a company here at Buckingham. And so what are we seeing? I think 24 will be better than 23. If for no other reason, interest rates have seemingly stabilized. Now we can speculate. Are they going to come down? Are they going to stay stable? If you look at the last 10 to 11 presidential cycles, and we're in an election year, right? And regardless of what side of the aisle the president came from, interest rates usually stay pretty stagnant in that election year. And I think this will be no different. I'm kind of the mindset that we might see something this summer that goes down slightly, and that'll spark some activity. But are we going back down to 3 and 4%? I don't think so in the foreseeable future, and maybe not in my lifetime.
Unfortunately.
So what is happening? I'm seeing portfolios go up for sale, right? So there is still, the cliche of dry powder. There's a lot of it. And so people are looking for big placement. You're seeing a lot of loan assumptions that are taking place. And I think that is starting to happen as opposed to what we saw in 23. Yep. Development's a whole different story. We read the doom and gloom of permitting's at a 10-year, it's at a 15-year low, it's down, 20 to 40 to 60%, depending on the markets you're in. And that's all true statements. Now, deliveries are going to reach an all-time high this year. Okay. And that's if we just put our developer hat on. It takes easily 3 years, sometimes up to 5, to get a deal done. Between the land acquisition, the entitlements, the securing of the construction loans, all the things it takes to get a deal to come to fruition. So a lot of the deals that we're seeing delivered today were started, pre or during COVID. And it's hard to think in that time frame, but that's the reality. And so you're still going to see some market saturation in some of your bigger markets on the coast, and certainly in the Sun Belt, where I'm at in Tampa. I mean, I go downtown and there's still several apartment deals that are under construction, both suburban and urban. And so, we're going to still see that. I think that we will then see a lull, and it'll probably be a 2 or 3 year lull because of that permitting dry up. And so I don't think we'll see another, call it, boom in construction. It won't be anything like we saw in this last cycle, at least in the inception. But you won't see a ton of new construction in 25, and certainly not in 26. Maybe in 27 we'll see that ramp up again.
Well, I kind of have a question for you, because I've been looking at your background photo, and it's a mixed use, looks like a commercial property, probably has residential above. Your Buckingham is in Indianapolis, and I've been reading in Ohio. It's a pretty not hot commodity or hot trend, but the trend is this office to residential conversion. And I wondered if you guys are seeing any of that happening in some of the markets that you're operating in, and if that plays into, because then you don't really have, you're not building an asset from the ground up. You're taking something that's already there and repurposing it for a different use. Do you see any of that happening in the markets that you guys are operating in?
I do. And I will tell you, I've done some of those deals in the past, both, past life, call it, they're hard, right? Yeah. You're doing those, you're typically working with the municipality because it is C class or lesser than office. Sometimes it's historic, so you're getting historic land use credits, you're getting TIF. So there's a lot to make those deals happen. Now, wearing our owner's hat, those are usually the most lucrative, right? The harder they are to do, the less competition there is to do them, and usually the biggest waterfall at the end. But the thing when we talk about this, because I know it's been a hot topic, especially as office has kind of a fall off, and we'll talk a bit more about what we're seeing as developments are coming to the market. There's certainly a bigger onus on, the work from home as it relates to the floor plan design and the amenity design. Yep. When I came into the industry, bulk cable was a big thing, right? And that fell off, and we had marketing agreements. And now bulk managed Wi-Fi is a really big thing. So we've come full circle there, and that's, I think, has a lot to do with how connected we are as a society. But certainly the work from home contingent is a big part of that.
Yeah.
All that to say, you have to be very intentional when you look at office buildings and how that conversion can work, because the floor plate makes all the difference in the world. So if you've got a 150,000 square foot building, it'll probably work because it's not so wide that you can't put floor plans in there, but you need that shallow floor plate, because when you get that kind of 1970s, 1980s office construction, not only do you have some environmental concerns in terms of what it was built with,
right,
and that can make or break a deal, but if you have these massive office buildings that are just big squares or huge rectangles, you can't put floor plans in there unless you carve the center of the building out, because there's no natural light at some point, or you're creating little pizza slice floor plans and they're inefficient and they don't work. And so it takes a lot of engineering, a lot of great architecture to make those deals work. And like I said, they're harder, and therefore they can really be pretty interesting from an investment standpoint. And by the way, if you do it right, Chicago's a great example. It can be really cool, right? You get some really unique architecture, like you referenced in the background there. You get, 1920s, 1940s, kind of Gothic architecture in Chicago and stuff that can be really cool buildings, but they're hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, folks. I wanted to take a quick 30-second break so that I could say, I hope you're enjoying today's episode, which couldn't be brought to you without being superpowered by Sales Mail. I mean, really, we couldn't produce this content without them. Sales Mail is the easiest and best tool for sending personalized video via email, text, and CRM. So, if you really are enjoying today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you would visit salesmail.com so you can check out how our solutions might impact your business communications. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. Okay, that's enough. Now back to the conversation. Do you guys, is Buckingham an owner, operator, third-party manager? Do you do all of it?
We do. So we develop, we acquire, we third-party manage, and most of that has been what we've been doing for 40 years. The third party, we're a bit newer to that space, and that is part of why I joined the firm. We'll talk about kind of the third party do's and don'ts, but Brad Chambers, our CEO, was literally getting people knocking on his door saying, your hands-on approach, you're in the details, management is something that we would like on our assets. Would you manage for us? And so kind of out of demand, we've started to do third-party management. We're very intentional about that. So I can tell you, since joining the firm, I've actually turned down more business than we've taken on.
Okay.
But that is, we want to make sure we do it right, and that we can be successful for our clients. And so, very intentional about how we grow.
That's great. And I'm excited to hear about some of your third-party do's and don'ts. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. But I've seen a lot of activity happening in that third-party managed space where, RPM is moving fast and taking names. I think just this morning or yesterday, they announced acquisition of Wood Partners and another
BH.
firm. Oh yeah, BH. Yeah, couldn't believe it. So, I think we're seeing a lot of that happening too. Is that sort of in lieu of, the development opportunities that are harder to come by? It's a little easier for bigger companies to sort of swoop in and acquire versus trying to do stuff from the ground floor up?
Yeah, I think that's right. And Asset Living is another one that comes to mind. They just took down First Communities in the fourth quarter. And so, I think we're going to continue to see consolidation. There's probably dozens of 5,000 to 10,000 unit companies that aren't necessarily hitting the big news wire that are also combining strengths or folding in. And there's several reasons for that. I think in this last cycle, we saw a lot of companies that grew organically, and they were doing well, and maybe they even sold right? They got out in 21 and 22 and made a bundle of money, but have had the inability to then go out and do anything with that because the numbers just don't pencil. And so So what do? Do you run an inefficient management company, or do you fold in with an operator with a proven track record that's doing well? And so, I think in each situation, the scenario is different, but I do think this is a great time for consolidation. It's something that's on my radar, looking at mergers, acquisitions, kind of strategic joint ventures. And I think we're all going to have to get a little leaner and meaner and a little more nimble and entrepreneurial. Because when the tide was high, all boats were floating, and we're no longer on high tide.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so let's kind of parlay into that conversation around some of the do's and don'ts. What's your portfolio unit size at
we're about 15,000 units today.
A nice size. Yeah.
Yep. So, I would call us, compared to some of the names that we just rattled off, we're a bit more boutique though.
There's something to that for sure. And I'm sure your team feels it because it's, typically a little easier to get things across the finish line in terms of new initiatives and process improvements and things like that when you are a bit of a smaller shop. Sometimes it takes longer and sometimes it never gets across the finish line when you're a larger operator.
Yeah, no, and that's what we're hearing from our clients, right? So when you got a few thousand units and you're being managed by a company that has 400,000 or 500,000 units, you may want to your point, try something at your asset that if it's not kind of within the templated floor plate of that management company, it's going to create inefficiencies for them. And there's going to be resistance.
Yeah.
Again, we're small enough, nimble enough that we enjoy that entrepreneurial spirit. And if the dollars make sense, yes, let's try it. There's certainly limits for us too.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, certainly being more of a boutique size, there's still a very hands-on approach. Our regionals are still only going to oversee 5 or 6 assets, and they're going to be in the weeds to the degree that they need to be to make operations successful.
Yeah, well, 5 or 6 assets is a lot better than 8 or 10, which is, I've seen, and even at I was at CS Living for a little while here in Richmond, and some of those RMs were managing, 8 to 10 properties. That's not easy, no matter.
Yeah, in the short term, that's I think achievable. And if you have to do that as a management company, certainly we've all been there, but that hopefully that's as you're hiring and adding to the team to alleviate that pressure. A lot of companies, again, certainly some of those bigger ones have put themselves in a fee situation where you kind of have to load up your regionals that heavy to make the overhead make sense. And when you do that, you're getting to the sites monthly or quarterly to provide support as opposed to, weekly or bi-monthly or more as needed instead of the property's on fire and I need you. So without going too deep into it, I think keeping it that manageable size, and as I kind of talked about before, where we're kind of turning down some opportunities, it's really making sure that we grow strategically. So growing into markets where we can properly support things, making sure that from an asset class that we're managing what we know, and we know A and B, and we know value add C. We also have a compliance department that really focuses on LIHTC. And so we'll work in those areas. That being said, my job with the company is to also vet out the client and make sure that it's a client with a track record or a similar view of the world as us. One of the areas that I think we were going to talk about too is distress and how that's different in this cycle than it is in the last cycle. And that's something we vet out too. Because taking on, either side of distress, whether that's asset distressed or debt distressed, can really put a toll on the team. And so understanding what that plan is important to us as well.
Yeah. It's almost like hiring a team member. Do they fit the culture? Do they have the same values? Are they, do they come with the skill set that, kind of matches with the direction that we're headed? So it's an interesting conversation to have for sure. Do you guys take a standard approach? Like here's our operating platform, take it or leave it? Or are you letting operators or owners pick kind of what they want in terms of maybe a property management software or reporting structure? How does that look for you guys?
We have a standardized template like most management companies. Now, will we scribble outside the lines? We will in some instances. We do want to stick with our primary use property management software solution
Yeah.
because that's what we can best support.
Yeah.
But if you have a different call it SEO provider or a different reporting structure, as long as we can do it well, we're amenable to change in some of those areas. So there are some hard lines in the sand, but I would say fewer than there are with some of the bigger shops that again, just when you're a size that the momentum can't necessarily be slowed.
Yeah.
You can't make those changes. So there are certainly areas where we can and can't scribble.
Yeah. I love looking through the lens of, what can we effectively and really solidly support versus let's try to get business no matter what operating system or what, vendor vetting system they're on, to have that consistency, especially for your support team, your regional managers, any of your training folks, that's huge. And for the sites to get the support that they need, it makes it so much harder when you have a one-off that's, now, no disrespect to Tara Samuels, but now the redheaded freckled stepchild who never feels like they get the attention or support that they need because they are that different, whatever it might be. Operating system is probably the most common denominator. But had to make an homage to her at some point or another here.
I'm sure she'll appreciate being called a redheaded stepchild.
I'm sure she'll probably kick me the next time she sees me. Speaking of do's and don'ts, what are some of the things that you think folks that are either in that third party universe or thinking of moving into that direction? What are some of the do's that you think folks should pay attention to?
So, and I think this can go from an employee standpoint all the way to an owner standpoint when they're vetting a third-party management company, right? And as much as we've all heard it and would love to delve deeper, culture is so important. Even more so today than it's been in the past because it affects retention and that directly affects resident retention, right? If they see a new manager every 3 months, there's an eye roll when the renewal letter comes because things go unfinished or unanswered and undone. And so, the ability to recruit and more, or as importantly, retain talent, I think is huge. It's huge for the owners. When I started pitching third-party business a decade plus ago, you'd have the regional vice president in there, you'd have the marketing team, and you'd have the regional that was going to oversee the property. Now, and over the last several years, I mean, you have the resumes of the service manager, the leasing manager, if there is one, if it's a lease up, the property manager sitting in the pitch with you.
Right.
Which is appropriate, by the way. I mean, when we look at new construction development assets, minimally, you're talking about somewhere between $60 to $100 million of an investment. And you want to know that regional vice president, and you definitely want to know the regional, but the person that's responsible for the running of the business day to day is, I think, probably the most important person in the room.
I will say, how you doing?
I mean, they're the ones really running the business, and all the rest of those people, if done correctly, are going to be support and checks and balances to that person. But in terms of the dues, really vetting that out. I think Glassdoor tells a story, but like any online reputation management, you get people who are angry that speak the loudest, right? So it's hard to get people that are pleased and content to say, I love this place.
It's like residents. How strange is that?
Right. And that's where, at least on that side of things, I don't know if we were recording earlier, but it really helps to have friends in the industry that when you are vetting out jobs, that you can pick up the phone and say, what do you know about this place, or my direct report, and really kind of vetting that through. And I think that for owners that are hiring third party, again, it's the same. Understanding the season and the tenure, and we talked about some of these companies who are quickly acquiring each other and growing rapidly. And there's a allure to that. And, I'm sure when you talk about buying power and things like that, it's fantastic. And there's a great story there. But no one's indentured to a property, but making sure that the team that you hire is going to be the team in 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
To some degree is so important. And so I think, vetting that process and kind of the go forward as these folks acquire each other is very, very important.
Yeah. I love the fact that you highlighted having the community manager who's actually going to be running the operations every day at the asset to be, an active part of that conversation. Are you involving them as well on like asset review calls with ownership on a regular basis too?
We are. So on a lot of the assets, specifically the lease ups, the ones that are going through comprehensive value add, or when an owner wants it, there's in several cases weekly calls. And yeah, we're training the managers and certainly having them to a point where they're forward facing and they're a part of those calls and they're reporting to their performance. And I think it's extremely important. When I joined the industry, I looked at the sophistication that we had as an industry 25 years ago compared to today, and it's night and day.
Yeah, for sure.
Both educationally and how we've trained our people and kind of all points in between. So I think that's so important. I think understanding kind of point of contact from the owner to the third party manager, where a boutique company like ours, what I enjoy, and I had this at Village Green, and I certainly had this at different points in my career, is staying involved in the food chain. I might not be your primary point of contact, nor should I be, but I've had the same 847 phone number since 1997. And if you know me, I'll always answer it, right? And so if you need to get a hold of someone and you're not sure, I always want to be there to head off, where there's smoke, there's fire, and call me if you think there might be smoke. And I think when you grow to some of these large sizes, there by default has to be a lot of layering, and you can't necessarily get through to that. But there can be, right? It can still be done, but that's something that I think owners want to vet is really who is my primary point of contact? Yeah. And if I'm not happy, who's my primary point of contact?
Right. Yeah. Should be the same person.
in theory. Yeah. And I think the other thing and the do's and don'ts that owners ask me all the time is just conflict. Are we developing in the same place? Are we buying in the same place? Will you partner with us? And so again, being entrepreneurial and being able to say, yeah, let's take a look at that together, as opposed to let's both submit offers to the same broker behind each other's backs is right. Important to understand and how that works for us comparatively.
I think that's important for one other reason too, and that is building your bench strength and developing those managers, because so oftentimes, especially in larger companies that have, considerable unit count size, the RM does all the talking, and you can have a manager who is missing an opportunity to really build their skill set. I remember sitting in a meeting at Equity Residential, and they were talking through budgets and asking managers, do you understand? And managers were shaking their heads, but I could see in their eyes that they were not. I mean, they were shaking their head because they didn't want to say they didn't know. But, I think we do them a disservice when we don't allow them to kind of learn the ropes and understand how those conversations need to be handled, and, what you need to be looking at from a financial perspective, what you need to be looking at from a staffing perspective, and your strategy for retention and all those things. So I love that you guys, really position that manager to be that kind of front facing point of contact, because not only are you, developing a really great relationship between the owner and the person who is running their asset, but you're also helping to build that person's skills and develop their career path.
Yeah, look, it's a great point. And I think taking it a step further, as we talk about kind of state of the industry today, one of the things that you and I'm sure have been hearing for the last few years, and it's just more and more to the forefront, is the consolidation or the streamlining of processes and positions.
Yes, centralization.
Right? That's right. And as we talk about that, I want to say controlling the messaging, but that still has a negative connotation, and I don't want it to come across that way because there's a reality of job planning and career succession, right? And so for so long, we had these kind of, well, you come into leasing and then you're an assistant manager or a leasing manager, and that kind of differentiates the career path. And then you go into a property manager, and yet you learn job skills that are essential to be a property manager along that path. But you're taking someone who conceptually you hired to be the bubbly, front-facing, outgoing sales closer. Yeah. Then you put them in a role to be behind the closed door, collect the rent, get the renewals, and then and so you bounce them around into different skill sets. And although that can make them well-rounded, it can disenfranchise and kind of turn people off. And so as we centralize and get better at that, I think it's helping to define some of those career paths. Mm-hmm. And we've actually centralized maintenance in several situations, which has been fantastic. So we went that route ahead of going through the management and leasing, although we're doing that now as well. And what we found is having those conversations with the managers, going through the budget and getting them to have a greater understanding of the impact, right? Like driving ROI and really understanding what that looks like on a 5 cap, and then going, oh, wow. So, this actually creates that much value. And the other thing I'm proud to say, and I think a lot of firms can say this, we're not necessarily cutting jobs. That's not the goal of this. I think the goal is to be more efficient and create customer service. Yep. The reality is where we find ourselves in terms of hiring, whether you say we're in a recession or not, unemployment is still pretty low in most of the markets that we all operate in. Yeah. So, there's jobs that sit open for quite a long time. And so in a lot of cases for Buckingham, it's been, we're just going to close that requisition and run better as opposed to, eliminating roles, because that was never necessarily the intent. And we've had successes there. But you can't do that without the manager's buy-in. Right.
I love that, you really position it around the why and how the value add it happens, and educating them to see through that lens, how making a small change like a repurposed role or even a reduction in headcount, and how that can impact the value, that the return on investment for the ownership. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. Again, it's about buy-in, right? I mean, you're not going to have success if everyone's begrudgingly doing something. Mm-hmm. But if there's a greater understanding and some of the use case, when I look at kind of the case study for what we've done, and I look at some of these 4 to 5 property pods on the maintenance side that we've created, we've centralized it to where we're geolocating. So if you're on this property, you're going to continue to get tickets at the property you're at, so you're not running back and forth and being inefficient. We're also going to direct those using technology to your skill set. So Steve, if you're great at plumbing, you're getting the plumbing tickets. And if I'm great at carpentry, I'm getting the carpentry tickets. And so, we're not trying to ask everyone to be a jack of all trades. We're hiring better, which means we're paying more for the individual, which is creating, I think, a better longevity and a reduced ticket time. Yep. Because we're not asking the guy who knows ACs to go in and do drywall repairs. We're sending him to work on ACs. Yep. And so it's been more efficient for us, and in doing so, reduced work order time and expense on kind of mistakes or inefficiencies.
Yeah, and I bet it's reduced turnover too, because people are doing the things that they know how to do, that they enjoy doing, that they're efficient at doing. So that's got to have an impact on, I think that sometimes happens so often with the service tech is they get overwhelmed because they don't do it all well. They do a few things really well, but they begin to feel stretched too thin. I at my last company, they actually had a spreadsheet where everybody kind of listed what their skills were. The areas of, maintenance, like you mentioned, drywall and plumbing and electrical and HVAC and all those things, systems. And it listed those on spreadsheets, and people said, I'm an expert. I'm pretty good. I don't know it. I would like training. And we had, that for management as well. How many managers were good at Yardi and how many were good at budgets and how many were good at X, Y, and Z. Really identifying your talent pool and what they're good at so that you can leverage. And it's as easy as just sitting down and assessing talent and then putting them to the jobs that they do best. I love that approach. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's so far so good. In terms of the retention, we're about a year and a half into it. Retention's been good, but it takes a long time to kind of see how that really looks. But we're pretty hopeful, and so far it's been a really welcome change to the team.
Well, that's great. Well, it's been 40 years for a reason, and here's to 40 more with much good success. I love our conversation. One of the things that we do here at the Multifamily Mind, Ian, with each of our guests is we kind of position this final question to sort of tap the minds of these folks that we've identified as thought leaders in this space. And so we ask this question around audaciousness and what people think is going on in the multifamily universe. So we define the word audacious as extremely bold or daring, recklessly brave, or fearless, kind of like a fearless explorer. I'm going to climb that mountain, or I'm going to spelunk that cave, no matter how dangerous it might seem. It has to be done, and I have the passion and drive to do it. So from your perspective, you've got a great breadth of experience in the business. You've had your hands in multiple asset types. You've worked at, lots of different types of companies, owner operators, third-party managers. So Ian Bingham, the question for you is, what is your most audacious take on multifamily these days?
And I thought about this, and you're going to go, well, Ian, I don't know if that's audacious or bold or brave. But as I look at the shifts in the industry and kind of how things are maturating and changing, one of the things I think we're going to see, and we're going to start underwriting for it, and maybe that's the bold prediction, because it's really going to change the way that we look at our performance and how we acquire. I think, the standard residents live there for 2 years and they buy a home or they move on is going to change. And I think that's going to gain real longevity. I think it's going to be 3 to 4 years in the very foreseeable future. And I've got a lot of reasons as to why. So, as I thought through that, and I said, this is a prediction, but can I back it up? One of the ways I would back that up is BTR. I think as equity flocks to the build to rent space, people are then truly building a home with it, within their community. They're going to, in many cases, have the ability to grow a household. So, they're going to get married. They're going to bring children in. They're going to bring dogs in, but they're going to have the room to grow in that space.
Right. And just as a split kind of second thing for those in the listening audience who might be in the UK or other parts of the world, here in the US, we refer to BTR as single family rental communities. Am I correct in assuming that that's what you're talking about, Ian?
It is, although structured communities, so 100, 150 units within the same centralized geography, so not disparate one-off homes, but actually full-size communities of single-family home. But there's some things that I think are even more kind of inherent in that thought as to why they're going to stick around longer. We are at an all-time high in educated 20-year-old, 25-year-olds, right? Yeah. Well, we're also at an all-time high in student debt. And regardless of your politics, there's a reality to student debt and what that allows you to do to purchase a home.
I think we're probably at an all-time high of children returning to live with their parents.
So no, you're right. I think you're starting to see more generational living because and we already said unemployment's still low. So that this is not an employment factor. It's a economic factor. But I also think it's why, if you look at the delta between home ownership and rental, it continues to grow. Yes. And so, what used to be 20 years ago, a renter by necessity versus the renter choice was also fairly indicative of the asset class, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the case anymore. Renters by necessity are living in brand new Class AA communities in urban core areas, but that's still because of the delta to ownership. So you have that student debt factor. The same reasons that we struggle as owners to make deals work on some of the things that I would call are the inflexibles. I live in Florida. I watched per unit insurance prices double to triple over the last 5 years. Well, it's the same thing when you buy a single family home. So when you talk about those escrows on your mortgage, they've gone up exponentially as well. And so when you take those factors, you can go, well, those folks could buy a condo or a townhome. They can, but the HOA fees, I can tell you in Central Florida, those are $300 to $500 a month just for the HOA fees. When you layer all that up, plus coming in with your 3% down on an FHA home loan because you don't have 20% down because you've got $100,000 in student debt. When we do all this math, it really leads to longer term renters. And so I think as an industry, we'll see that number move up from the 2-year to a longer term renter, especially as we see the lessening of new construction deliver over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's bold, but I do see that as something that as we underwrite, we're going to start really taking a harder look at.
Yeah, no, I think it's bold. I think it's a bit daring to say, our assumptions regarding people's longevity in a multifamily or a build to rent community are changing. And it's good to hear that, because I think for the sales folks, the leasing folks that are listening, that helps them build a better case for, why the rents are where they're at, because I'm sure they're not in their leasing classes talking about insurance costs and, some of those things that have skyrocketed over the last 3 to 5 years. And the cost to run the property today is very different than it was even last year. So that's a great education opportunity for salespeople to feel more confident about their pricing. I think it's a wake-up call for operators who are building, developing, or repurposing properties to think about what kind of amenities are going to be important to keep people around for, 2 to 5 years, say. In-suite golf, virtual golf may not be what everybody is looking for these days. They may be looking for, flexible workspace that's someplace they can get out of the house for a few hours and focus on work, and maybe rent a cubie in your clubhouse somewhere that turns into an office space for them during the day. But, I think it's a good prediction. It's a good reminder to all those that are listening to kind of up the ante on service, customer experience, leverage the folks that you've got on your team and the things that they're good at to provide the best level of service that you can. I think it's pretty darn audacious, my friend.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. This has been a great conversation, Ian. I am so appreciative of your time, because I know folks at your level of organizations are busy people. So thank you for making time to join us today. This has been the Multifamily Mind. I'm Steve Wunch. This was super powered by Sales Mail, and we look forward to seeing you back here on our next episode. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Multifamily Mind podcast, brought to you by Sales Mail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, and CRM. To learn more, go to salesmail.com. And remember, always be audacious. Until next time, I'm Steve Wunch. Have a great week.